So I won't talk for too long, but I want to say thank you. This is like somewhat of a farewell tour when I go and speak this year, since I'm not running again. Hopefully I will be back next year as your Florida Democratic Party chair. If I'm not, please just still invite Hillary, and I promise she'll be about 18 months old at that point, and she will still give a better speech than what you'll hear at the RNC in a couple of weeks. So, you know, so being the last speaker, you know, I could spend a lot of time, I could talk, and as a new father, I could talk about all the crap I deal with and all the dirty diapers, but you know about the 6 years in the legislature. I could go on about the crying and the whining, but you know about Mike Herodopoulos' tenure as Senate President. And I could definitely talk about sleepless nights as a new father, but you probably already know about the Republican Party of Florida's credit card jaunts across the country. So, you know, so that leaves me with talking about where we're going to go as a party and as a country and as a state in this next election and going into 2014. And I want to say one thing before I get started on that, which is, you know, Tony was a fantastic state representative when he was up there, and I know Alan said that it's like, that Brevard County was a little bit like the White Sox, but I guarantee you that when you send somebody to Tallahassee, you hit one out of the park. And when you send one to DC and Bill Nelson, you hit them out of the park. So when you make contact, you hit them out of the park, I guarantee you. So, you know, we're standing on the precipice in this next election. And every election cycle, you hear people say, this is the most important election that we'll ever have. And to some extent, it is. Because we're going to make a decision for this country about whether we're going to move forward or we're going to move backwards. And you know, hear about these lies that get spewed on TV and 30-second commercials. But let's really look what's happened in the last 3.5 years. By the way, let's really look at what's happened in the last 12 years. Because that's really what we should compare to. When George Bush came into office in January 2001, he wrote in from Bill Clinton's 8 years of economic expansion. Huge economic, the biggest peacetime economic expansion America had seen in 50 years. When George Bush took office, there was a budget surplus. Yes. Yep. For the first time in nearly 50 years, a budget surplus. Yep. And by the time George Bush left office 8 years later, we were on our way to economic collapse in this country. And there is absolutely no doubt, in fact, thank God for term limits, that George Bush wasn't president for another term on top of that. And what has really happened in the last 3.5 years? We are approaching 40 straight months of job growth in this country. We are turning this country, and by the way, we have ended don't ask, don't tell. Yes. People can openly serve now. We have, and what the, you know, by the way, you look at the polling of the Tea Party people and you ask them, what's happened to taxes since President Obama took office? What happened to taxes? And they'll go, oh, Barack Obama raised our taxes. So of course he did. In fact, the average middle-class family saw their taxes decline by about $2,200 every year. So what's really happened? I'll tell you what's happened. In 2010, we sat on our laurels and we let radical right-wing governors take over about 15 states in this country, including here in Florida. And that's what's happened. Rick Scott creates a headwind for Barack Obama every single day. That $2,200 tax break, and you heard Senator Rich talk about it, well, there went your tuition. $300 million cut in higher ed and 15% tuition increase every year. There's where that $2,200 went. You saw your driver's license fees increase, court fees increase, everything increased. By the way, never let these Republicans in Florida get away with saying they didn't raise taxes. In 2010, when there was a budget shortfall, despite the stimulus, they didn't turn to the corporations that they have handed out $14 billion of tax breaks to since Jeb Bush took office in 1998. $14 billion that now costs this state $4 billion every single year. So when they had $1 billion budget shortfall, they didn't turn to those corporations and say, hey, we need a little bit of that back. They turned to me and you and the small businesses around this state, and they took money from us. That's where they raised their taxes by $800 million a year. The last 3 years, a total of $2.5 billion of tax increases on the middle class in Florida. So every time that President Obama gave us a tax cut, we faced the headwinds of Rick Scott and the radical legislature in Tallahassee. That's what's happened in Florida. And that's what we need to remind our neighbors of every single day. The policies of President Obama and Senator Nelson have given you tax breaks, have given you job creation across this country. But yet we face the headwinds of one man named Rick Scott. And I know Senator Rick said Rick Scott's not on the ballot this fall, but he is.
Yes.
All his friends are there. His ideas are there. In fact, I would even go as far to say that Rick Scott is really on the ballot this fall, and his name's Mitt Romney. And in fact, basically Mitt Romney is Rick Scott with hair. If you think about where did Mitt Romney make his money from? Well, he basically fired people. That's Rick Scott. Rick Scott built his hospital system by basically firing people. He fired more than Gary. He fired people well before he ever became governor of Florida. He was firing people for decades, and he's sucking all the money up into the CEO's office. That's what Rick Scott did, just like Mitt Romney. And Susanna always says, nobody knows what this little thing is. But go and Google it after tonight. I promise you'll laugh. Because I always say that basically, with Mitt Romney and Rick Scott, it's a Willy Wooler. And don't Google this. Remember the little toy with the little magnet? It was a bald guy, and he had the little magnets, and you had to put the hair onto the bald guy. Go Google it when you get home. It's called a Willy Wooler. And it works just so, a Woolly Willer. I always get that confused. A Woolly Willer, which of course works well with Mitt Romney. So we have Rick Scott on the ballot. And not only do we have him at the top of the ticket in the name of Mitt Romney, and by the way, I love that he picked Paul Ryan today as his vice presidential candidate. It's sort of amazing. You go back to 2008, and John McCain said that Sarah Palin was a better vice presidential pick than Mitt Romney. So you have to ask yourself then, exactly what does Marco Rubio really have in those RPOF credit cards to suggest that the guy who wrote a budget to get rid of Medicare is a better candidate to try to win the state of Florida with 28% of the vote above the age of 65 is a better candidate than Marco Rubio. By the way, a perfect ticket. Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan are a perfect ticket. And for those of you that have been registered in Brevard County, they are a perfect ticket for 1950. Maybe 1950. I mean, 1950 was that's given the progressive end. 1950. Think about that though. Paul Ryan voted to outlaw birth control. It has been since at least the 1950s since someone has tried to outlaw birth control. We thought that battle was won, and that's why we can never, by the way, never set on our laurels. So, and by the way, so then 1950s, that was before Medicare, which Paul Ryan wants to end as well. So literally. And of course, then you've got Mitt Romney at the top. I mean, what more could you want? Really, Mitt Romney, 1950 sort of generous, given that the robber baron nature of Mitt Romney's wealth really goes back to the 1850s instead of the 1950s. So basically, if you average it out, maybe around the turn of the last century, that's what kind of ticket the Republicans are putting forward for 2012. And we have got to make sure, by the way, again, Rick Scott is on this ballot. And if Rick Scott's not Mitt Romney, Rick Scott's friends down that ticket is what we've got to stop this year. We have got to stop the Florida legislature. People say, Scott, this has got to be the craziest 2 years you ever spent in the Florida legislature. They're like, well, yeah, babe, not really. And Tony will tell you this. They've always been this crazy. They've always been this radical since my 6 years. The big difference is that we went from a moderate Republican governor to a Tea Party governor. And these legislatures are Rick Scott's absolute friends. They are his puppets. You will watch them vote with Rick Scott 100% of the time. And we have got to stop them. We can stop them in 2012. We don't have to wait to 2014 to build the legislature that Nan Rich is going to need to get things done in 2014. We can start right here in November 2012. So we've got to make sure that happens. And everybody thinks, oh, it's the most important election, but don't worry, I'm sure there'll be 100,000 votes this way or 100,000 votes that way. And I guarantee you there were a lot of people that voted for Ralph Nader in 2000 that thought the same thing. Don't worry about it, I'm sure Al Gore's got that. I'm not going to go vote today because I'm sure that somebody's going to win this by plenty of votes. And of course it came down to less than 550 votes. And Florida very well, with the voter purging that is going on right now, and we see this across the country, the voter purges that goes on across the country. And when I talk about the headwinds that we face in Florida, the same headwinds in all these other states as well, where these right-wing governors took control. So as you know, I mean, the far right may say they believe in original sin, but they don't believe in original thought, because they're all doing the exact same thing. And they all work from the exact same playbook. And so we have got to make sure that we get out there. And there's an old saying that says that a lie, and you can see it up on TV, that a lie will be halfway around the world before the truth gets their shoes tied. You are the shoes. You are the truth. The lies are spewing on TV. We've already seen it. I see it every single day in the Orlando media market. The lies are being spewed. They're going halfway around the world every single day. All of you in this room, you are the shoes. You are the truth that we have got to put our shoes on and go talk to our neighbors. Put your shoes on. The lies are already happening.